In January 2014, I tried to do something just really stupid. I attempted to ski while pulling a heavy sled, 1,600 kilometres across and over a remote mountain range deep inside the Arctic Circle in northern Alaska in winter. Aside from the obvious physical difficulties, my expedition partner and I would have faced 2 months of near continuous darkness, temperatures ranging from minus 20 degrees Celsius to minus 100, including wind chill, the prospect of rescue being near impossible, and a complete lack of information, because not only had this expedition never been completed, this expedition had never even been attempted. One of the park rangers we sought advice from point blank told us that we were going to die, with a smile on his face. And the rest were slightly more, not encouraging, but I guess less dour. In fact, in 2012, when I traversed this range, the Brooks Range, in summer, 2 men did die up there. One of them is still missing, and his campsite was only found 2 years later. Although 2 deaths might not seem like a large number in the adventure world, as far as I know, only 6 people attempted crossings that year, in summer. All right, now that we've established that I have a propensity for foolishness, I'm going to back up a bit and explain how I arrived at this point, fortunately still with all my fingers and toes. I grew up in Brisbane before moving to Noosa Heads as a child. We were a surfing family. I attended a decent school, had good friends, went on fun family holidays, and generally lived a life devoid of hardships. But it was precisely this fortunate existence that made me want to seek out pain and suffering. I think most people want resilience as a virtue, but how can you be resilient living in subtropical Noosa Heads? Before you can display resilience, something bad has to happen. Aristotle defined virtue as a habit, so if you truly want resilience as a virtue, then you need to habitually display it. People are so afraid of fear and pain, but yet the paradox is that once you learn how to deal with fear and pain, and even welcome it, then it's no longer that monster under your bed. Fear in particular is something that I've always had a deep fascination with. My dad is a psychiatrist, and he used to refer to it as my unhealthy flirtation with fear. His dilemma is that from a young age, his profession facilitated my research and understanding of fear. I am not, nor have ever been, an adrenaline junkie. I don't do dangerous things just for the sake of doing dangerous things. I do dangerous things because I believe everything must be a choice. Even when it comes to living, I don't want to merely be passive. When I put myself in situations where I need to fight and perform and maintain control to stay alive, then I am making a choice to live. I don't risk my life because I want to die. I risk my life to reaffirm my desire to live. As well as that, I believe we're all capable of really remarkable things if only given enough motivation and desire. When I set myself goals where failure could very likely lead to my death, I very quickly find out what I'm capable of. Because other than saving the life of a loved one, there is nothing more motivating than the desire to live. Next time you say to yourself that you can't do something, ask yourself if you could, if your life depended on it. Fear in particular is something that I've really always had a deep fascination with. And every year, there's more and more research and information is made available on it. But there are still prolific misconceptions around fear. I must confess that many of my fellow professional speakers around the world perpetuate many of these misconceptions. I hear things such as, fear is a product of your mind and is not real. There is that moronic acronym that fear stands for false evidence appearing real. People use the word conquer in relation to fear, as if it is an enemy that must be defeated. Fear is an adaptive phenomenon in that it makes us avoid dangers. However, it can become pathological in cases such as post-traumatic stress disorder. Through my research, I came across 2 examples that I feel best display the realities of fear. The first example was with subjects who are cortically blind. So their eyes see, but their conscious brains don't register the information. It's as if they're blind in a sense. These subjects were hooked up to skin galvanic response sensors, which are the devices used to measure fear. Images that would commonly elicit fear were placed in front of these subjects without the subjects knowing what was being placed in front of them. They had no idea if this study was about arousal or humour or fear. They had no information. The subjects registered fear on the device. Take a moment to wrap your head around this. On a conscious level, there was nothing happening with these subjects. On a physiological level, they were crapping their pants. What this means is that if we're exposed to a stimulus that we have an evolutionary predisposition to fear, our bodies will react to it regardless of whether we are conscious of it or not. The second example was in a hospital in Israel. In this hospital, there were 3 pregnant women in the final stages before giving birth. The pregnant women had heart rate monitors hooked up to their unborn children, and all of a sudden, a very loud air raid siren sounded. With the onset of the siren, all 3 fetuses' heart rates dropped by about 50%. This is known as bradycardia. After about 2 minutes, the fetal heart rates returned to normal. This was a fear response that was passed on from our distant relatives, fish. Sharks and other predators in the ocean can pick up the heartbeats of fish so that when they swim past, the fish can drop their heart rates so that they effectively become invisible. When humans faint, this is generally because our heart rates have dropped too much with regards to this response. This was the first instance of a fetus being recorded to respond to a fear stimulus because, as you can imagine, it's somewhat unethical to scare pregnant women just for the sake of testing this. Fear is not the enemy. Fear keeps us alive. Fear is our best friend. Everywhere we go, it is with us, and all it asks in return is that we suffer a little. After years of testing myself in generally juvenile ways, I read the book Into the Wild at the age of 21 when I was at university. For those of you who don't know this story, it tells the true tale of Christopher McCandless, a 24-year-old American guy who went into the Alaskan wilderness to live off the land, and sadly, 4 months later, he was dead. As soon as I finished this book, something inside me clicked, and I thought, fantastic, that's for me. And I dropped out of university and planned to go to Alaska the following year. The problem was, at this point in my life, I didn't know how to use a map and compass. I'd never camped in the wilderness. I had never been by myself for more than a day or two, and I knew nothing about hunting. So how was I able to commit to this goal? I bet you'll think I'm going to say, if you believe in yourself, you can achieve anything. But I learned that that's not exactly true. What I learned was that self-belief will only get you to the start line. If you want to get to the finish line, you need well-directed hard work and determination. The following year, I completed a 75-day wilderness course in Alaska and then set myself the very ambitious goal of traversing the Brooks Range solo. At the time, there were only 4 men documented to have accomplished this solo. The expedition would involve 1,000 kilometers of hiking and 600 kilometers of paddling a kayak. The Brooks Range is teeming with grizzlies, wolves, moose, caribou, and wolverines. It is devoid of human existence, save for a few small Inuit villages. During the 1,600 kilometers, I would only cross 1 road and pass through 2 small Inuit villages. The range is so hostile and remote that Andrew Skirker, who I believe is the greatest long-distance hiker in the world and is a hero of mine, describes the Brooks Range as a different category of wilderness to anywhere else on Earth. This photo here is of a plane that crashed. I took this photo. The plane crashed in 1958 with 2 Park servicemen in it. After this crash, the biggest search ever conducted in Brooks Range history was initiated, involving 29 planes and 280 people, all looking for these men, and they were never found. 21 years later, 2 hikers discovered the wreckage. Over the course of the next 3 years, I failed 3 times in my goal of traversing the Brooks Range. The first year, I lasted 4 days before a helicopter rescued me. The second and third attempts, I lasted 2 days each, managing to hike back to a little grassy strip where a small bush plane could pick me up. I felt like a massive failure, and rightly so. This photo is of me in the rescue helicopter. I'd no one to blame but myself, and I really hated myself for it. But not just that year, but the following years as well. But it was these low points that I clung onto when I needed motivation, because what better motivation can you have than wanting to avoid the toughest points of your life? I truly believe that my success was born lying in that helicopter, because there is nothing the Brooks Range could have thrown at me that would have compared to the devastation of my failures. The reason I failed was a combination of inexperience, chronic injuries, anxiety, and my ability to believe in myself so much that I convinced myself I was working as hard as I possibly could. The turning point for me came when I sat down and I said to myself, I can't traverse the Brooks Range. What do I have to do to be able to do it? I stopped believing that I would and started believing that I could. It was all about taking ownership for my failures, of admitting to myself that I wasn't good enough, but that didn't mean that I couldn't become good enough. I realized that if you have a big goal that you really want to achieve, you should ask yourself 2 questions every day. Number 1, what am I doing to earn the right to achieve that goal? And number 2, could I be doing more? The first thing I did was break the expedition down into little battles and worked on perfecting every facet. For the first 3 attempts, I've been so focused on success, so focused on making it to the end, then I neglected to realize that every day out there would be a massive challenge in itself. And that broke me. For the fourth attempt, I forgot about success in a grand sense and set out just to succeed in perfecting every facet. As an example, I highlighted my pack weight as crucial, so I researched every single piece of gear that I was going to take and altered or excluded it. This very small carabiner is what I used to connect my map to my chest strap for the first 3 attempts. For attempt number 4, this is the carabiner I used. For the first 3 attempts, this 5-gram tube of toothpaste is what I used. For attempt number 4, I found Dr. Bronner's magic soap. 2 drops on my toothbrush and I was good to go. It tasted like arse, but it saved me about 4.5 grams. Now, I knew that those 4.5 grams weren't going to make or break the expedition, but it was all about my mindset. The only way I was going to be successful was if I went so far beyond where I thought I needed to go to be successful. Overcoming my anxiety was another major challenge for me. I had my first ever panic attack the night before flying to Alaska for the second attempt, and they continue on to this day in association with my expeditions. My anxiety was my primary reason for my second and third failure. Where I went wrong is that I viewed my anxiety as a terrible thing and my body's way of telling me that I shouldn't be out there. For the fourth attempt, I realized that my anxiety was perfectly natural. I dedicated 6 years of my life to this one goal. I suffered chronic injuries, huge financial expense, and the pressure of knowing that friends and public kept witnessing me fail. And on top of that, there was the very real risk of dying. Dad, who assesses risk as a daily basis for his psychiatric work, for the fourth attempt, very generously gave me a 5% chance of success and a 10% chance of dying. So for the fourth attempt, he didn't tell me about that until after the expedition. Very kind. So for the fourth attempt, I stopped trying to eliminate my anxiety and instead focused on managing it. That way, I still suffered anxiety and the odd panic attack, but I was able to deal with it and operate in existence with it. In 2012, I finally achieved my 6-year dream of traversing the Brooks Range solo. Not only that, but despite battling horrific Achilles tendonitis that began on the 5th day, I unwittingly beat the speed record by 10 days, traversing the range in 31 days. I averaged 52 kilometers a day for the hiking section and 93 kilometers a day for the kayaking section. At that time, the only other person to complete this traverse in under 2 months was my hero, Andrew Skirker. But my dream was never just about success or about breaking records. It was about pushing myself and learning what I was capable of. This is my favorite quote from Hermann Hesse. Most men won't swim until they're able to. That's how I think so many people are. They're so afraid of failure, they don't want to try something until they know they will succeed. But how can you know what you're capable of until you fail? And then failure is not the end. It's just another opportunity to set out and achieve your goal again. I learned that failure can be a really beautiful thing, especially if it is followed by success. Leading up to the winter traverse attempt, I knew my anxiety would be terrible, so I decided to take control of it. I'd read about the famous English rugby player Johnny Wilkinson scheduling his panic attacks, and I liked that element of controllability. One of the hardest parts of living with a panic disorder is the constant uncertainty of when you will suffer from anxiety. It is with painful irony that people suffer anxiety about when they will suffer anxiety. So what I did was schedule my panic attacks to begin 2 weeks before flying to Alaska. That way, in the months leading up to those 2 weeks, I wouldn't have to worry about having any panic attacks. Scheduling panic attacks may sound difficult and confusing to you, but it's simply a matter of convincing yourself that they will happen at a certain time. After living with a panic disorder for long enough, you learn what sets your anxiety off and what conditions precipitate it. Surprisingly, not only did it work for me in the sense that I didn't have any panic attacks in the months leading up to the 2 weeks, I also didn't have any major panic attacks in the 2 weeks that I was meant to. In Fairbanks, Alaska, for the 10 days preparing for the expedition, it was another matter. Being told by park rangers the myriad ways you will die, hearing tales of caribou frozen solid to the ground, and other such bedtime stories was not ideal for someone with anxiety. It was during this time that I accepted that the risks associated with this expedition were on the cusp of being unacceptable, but you have to be real about these things. And that is how we were able to make the objective decision to pull the plug when we did, and this was on the 10th day due to 3 of my fingers becoming frostbitten. The more experience I gained with fear, the more I realize it is a constant tightrope walk between listening to the voices in your head and blocking them out. Fear is an overbearing parent. The only thing it cares about is your safety. It just so happens that sometimes that can be to your detriment. My two biggest failures in life, my summer and winter traverses of the Brooks Range, ended very differently. My summer traverse ended in personal glory. My winter traverse ended in injury and remains unresolved. Both of these experiences I look back on with pride and joy. The best adventures are the ones you don't expect to succeed in.